Day 2005, Manchester's oldest live music venue closed its doors for a massive refurbishment. This is the Band on the Wall story.
It's such a vitally important part of the cultural life of the city that it's a treat to go there.
The band on the wall.
There was wonderful times, wonderful people, and if anybody was anybody, they wanted to be on Band of the Wall.
The band on the wall.
It's just got that cool thing. Well, it's not even cool when you look at it, you know, and that's the good thing about it. It's for people that know, you know.
The first written record of the building is 1803, when it was owned by Elizabeth Marsh. At this time, it was called the Georgian Dragon. By the 1930s, it was a thriving market pub showcasing live music every night. Jack and Florence Brunelli were members of the original six-piece band who played there.
It all started by the fact that we both went to the same teacher, which was Albert Mancini, and Albert was the one who taught both of us together. And we were brought up that way that we played together. Then when we got a little older, we got to 1939, he decided to take us with him to the Band on the Wall. And we played there regularly, every night. The day started at 8 o'clock, and then during the evening we're playing soft music to begin with. Then as the evening went on, we extra down, we did a little bit of jazz and a little bit of, well, anything that was going. And then we used to take a lot of requests from the audience.
During the war years, the Georgian Dragon was run by infamous landlord Ernie Tyson.
He was a tough man, and the men around him was tough, but with us, he was a gentle uncle.
We had a fabulous life here. The music was great, the people. As a child, it was just so fascinating. You find it hard to believe this day and age what used to go on around here. You know, can you imagine it? There was no cars. You had horses and carts passing by, flip flop, flip flop. You used to wake up to that sound every morning. And Father was so proud of living here. He absolutely loved it. He was heartbroken when he had to leave, due to a disturbance in the pub itself.
It was thanks to Ernie that the Georgian Dragon got its famous nickname. The resident musicians would scale a ladder each night to perform from a stage in the wall.
It seemed a little funny being stuck on the wall, but there was reasons for it. Big reasons.
Well, there wasn't any room, although it was a big pub.
That's
There's
right.
So many come in.
He made more room at the same
ended up
time.
on
He
the
didn't like us being down below, for tables being racked, just someone just walking up and spilling anything over. He went up at the wall. It was a bit of a joke in a way, but my dad used to say, "Have you been climbing again?" "Oh yes." "Have you been over the wall?" There wasn't a musician that I know who didn't want to be on the Band on the Wall.
I went into this pub, the Georgian Dragon, just after the war, and it was full of Yanks and other people. It was a real rough place. I think it's the sort of place you walk into, and as you walked in, a big burly waiter with a stained apron used to come down, plonk a pint of beer in front of you. Didn't wait for your order, plonk a pint of beer, say, "Right, there you paid for it." You didn't argue, you just had, say, "Oh yes sir, yes sir, you're okay." Not the sort of place you take your girlfriend or your wife in.
I've got a memory of it actually when it was Band on the Wall in the 1960s. Before there'd been music there during the Second World War. Because I worked on Smithfield Market in 1965, and you go in, and when they had closing time, which was midday, it closed. The landlord used to wear a huge apron, and he'd have a broom, and you go, right, drink up now, and you only have 5 minutes drinking up time then. And then he'd push all the glasses off with the broom onto the floor, so they'd smashed, he didn't care, just to get you out.
As the surrounding area went into decline, the Georgian Dragon mirrored this slump and eventually closed. 1975 marked the dawn of a new era at the pub when it was bought by local jazz musician Steve Morris.
Steve was a very dedicated musician. He was really a really good player, but couldn't find anywhere to actually express himself in his one love, which was basically jazz. And so the idea was obviously, as I said before, to open his own club and play whenever he wanted. So in partnership with a fellow called Frank Cusick, I think his name was Cusick, I'll never forget exactly how to pronounce his name, they went into partnership and started to renovate this pub. And they were doing it personally by hand with whatever cheap labour they could get hold of, because they hadn't a lot of money. They came to me one day, he said, by the way, I'm opening on Monday. He said, I haven't got a name for the shop, for the club. He said, I still haven't got a name for it. He said, I'm ready to open. So I had a chat outside my shop, standing on the pavement actually. So I said, well, how about its nickname? He said, what's that? He said, the band on the wall. And living amongst it for so long, he never thought about it, you see, he just thought about it as Georgian Dragon. He said, that's it. At that very moment in time, it became the band on the wall.
Steve Morris was always very keen in giving local musicians a chance to play in the club, and that generally happened at weekends. And Ian Crawl, of course, the director of the band on the wall, being a bass player, he played here.
Now, anybody who'd been to New York, let's say, in 1975, would immediately recognise what the band on the wall became. It was a venue with a built-in PA. Now, this is unheard of. Groups used to have to schlep around carrying the PAs and setting them up, but they actually had a place for the mixing desk. They had the speakers up hanging from the ceilings. There was a proper stage. It was designed as a decent venue for musicians to play in, and it became an integral part of the cultural life of Manchester. And I think a very unique one. I would still say it's very unique. And it's open and attractive to people. Now remember, the first Pistols gig, 76, Buzzcocks formed in 76, Stiff Kittens, who became Joy Division, they're all there. And they're all there at Band on the Wall. And one of the principal reasons for that was there was a kind of locals listing paper called the New Manchester Review. New Manchester Review would put groups on, local groups, and it was a fundraiser night for the magazine. It became a centre for local young musicians to play in, one of the very, very few venues other than a university venue or a college venue that they could play in. And it sees in the later 1970s, it's the renaissance of Manchester music. Another thing that developed there is that as punk petered out and you kind of get the post-punk era, was a thing called the Manchester Musicians Collective. And this again, this is bands like Tools You Can Trust, Spherical Objects. They formed a collective, and there was a recording studio quite close by, and they would make albums, and each band in the collective would get a track on the album. And they sold it. There's actually a famous cover of I think the first Musicians Collective album, with them all grouped outside Band on the Wall. So it became a university of alternative music. It became the graduation ceremony for lots of local musicians to pass through. And it was a fantastic atmosphere because under Steve's guidance, specific nights were given over to specific genres of music. So you'd have jazz night, you'd have reggae nights began to start there. The first place outside of Moss Side where sound systems were heard. They get in toasting dub DJs. They would bring in bands like Burning Spear. So that night is promoting ethnographic music from Manchester. They've got a jazz night that was bringing in fairly big players, Don Weller, Lol Coxhill, and the odd Americans who happened to be wandering around the Northwest. And so you could pick and choose whenever you wanted to go. And they also started doing a little magazine type thing, or a fold-out leaflet that listed who was on. I mean, this was so professional. It was absolutely it was definitive in defining how things would have to go in the future for other venues in Manchester. It was there at Band on the Wall, it became the cutting edge of new contemporary Manchester music.
It's a very important venue. It can't be underestimated the importance that the Band on the Wall had to all forms of entertainment in the city. There are over 20 venues in Manchester that produce comedy, and the Band on the Wall was one of those first places that comedy was put on. Carolina Hearn played there, as I say, John Thompson played there, Steve Coogan played there, Dave Gorman played there, all these guys that came out of who are now, you know, the biggest names in British comedy, or some of them. And I think the Band on the Wall as a space, it was renowned as a jazz venue, but ultimately to me it's an entertainment space. It's a venue for the arts, and it was a good launch pad for comedy in Manchester.
The educational part of what happened at the Band on the Wall began, as far as I can recall, in the early 80s. The Band on the Wall was very much a pioneer for jazz education, certainly in the Northwest. All credit must go to Ian for having the foresight to get these things established, to bring in new audiences and to get people involved. Not just with jazz, you know, with all kinds of music.
In recent years, the Band on the Wall has nurtured some of Manchester's most respected contemporary club nights. This has popularised the venue with the new generation of music lovers.
It wasn't really about making money, it was just about me doing it and having a good place to go and play in my own town, which I thought was important for the music. And the main reason for Band on the Wall, because the sound system was the best in Manchester. For the not even just the size of the club, just it was the best in Manchester. The 2 or 3 times I've been here, I've been really impressed. It was loud, but not only was it loud, it was clear, and you'd walk out the club feeling normal. Your ears wouldn't be ringing, you know what I mean? You'd hear every single frequency of whatever the band played or what the DJ played, which is important sometimes in a club. The sound can sound really good for when the band's on, but when you change it to the DJ, it kind of loses something. The 2 or 3 times I've been here, it didn't, you know, it sounded crisp, you know what I mean? And that was like, right, this is the one, you know, it's got to be here or nowhere else. It's just been one of them places where I've just represented good music in Manchester for years and years. I don't care how it looks, you know what I mean? It's got that vibe, it's got the right vibe, it's got the history, and it's the right space. I mean, yeah, the most important thing about the Band on the Wall is that as a venue, it doesn't disappear and it keeps doing what it's doing, which is basically putting music first in this whole sort of world of where commercial dance music, cheap drinks, free entry stands for a lot these days, you know what I mean? The whole music factor gets lost, you know what I mean? And this venue, out of most of them, out of probably any of them in Manchester, is actually putting the music first.
It's just got such a fantastic atmosphere in it, and it is important, as I say, it's important in the fabric of Manchester's entertainment history. Joy Division have played there, for Christ's sakes.
I think the future is very rosy. Long live the Band on the Wall.